Just because a thing is not obsessed upon and longed for doesn't mean it can't be enjoyed when it's experienced. To lose all desires doesn't mean to lose all enjoyment. The thing is actually enjoyed more because what permitted a lack of longing for the experience also permits a greater alignment with the moment. So, whereas in the predominant state, a thing is dwelled upon in anticipation of it, and then when the thing is received, or the experience had, or being had, there is an alignment of awareness with the moment. But it's short-lived because there enters upon the diminishing of novelty there enters a new object of desire. And so the augmentation of the thought loop with the introduction of the new desired thing then pulls awareness into the timeline, a mental projection of the future that pulls attention's alignment away from the moment and into the mind. And in that is a separation. There is a separation from the truth. To the extent that attention is given to an imaginary thing is a departure from reality. Even if it describes the truth, it's out of alignment with the will of creation in its expression in this moment. It's an alternative. It's a conceptual alternative. So if, because of a lack of identification with thought and form, if there is less reactivity to thoughts, then attention is not drawn into them to the extent that emotions can be triggered. And in that stillness, there's a rest and a peace. There's a repurposing of energy away from the repairs that are required when the amygdala, which doesn't know the difference between a thought and reality, is triggered by thoughts. And then thus, the endocrine system is triggered by the amygdala. When there's less need for recovery from the damage done by stress hormones, the energy that was formerly dedicated to that is repurposed. Additionally, In attention's alignment with the moment, there appears the perception of the energy body. And if there's a great deal of blockage due to trauma, combined with an obsessive mind, there can be a perception, a discomfort. The energy is unbalanced and it burns when there's a misalignment of reality and attention. When attention is given to these unwanted ideas, there is a burning that's perceived in different meridians, areas of the energy body. And there's required a balancing. If energy accumulates in one area on one meridian, it can overload. Mal-distributed energy because of blockages, it causes kind of an overload of the circuits and it's uncomfortable. And so there has to be a letting go. To the extent that the energy is blocked and colored by bad memories or longings, the energy can be freed from that if those mental impressions can be relaxed. That is not an additive process. That is a letting go, a process of letting go of what is held in mind, and ultimately letting go of identification with the idea of the one to whom it applies. It's done through the modality of surrender. The feeling of the feelings that underlie thoughts, to the exclusion of the content, which is relational, has the hooks of identity, and thus it can trigger emotions. So if attention is given instead to the energy, which is not relational, energy doesn't have an identity because it does not just have distinguishing characteristics apart from the energy of any other. It's more of a commodity, so to speak. So it doesn't really relate to things. And so the energy is felt. It does have a feeling associated with it, though, and it can be uncomfortable. But in the modality of surrender, the energy is just felt. And it's accepted, and there's no resistance, and there's no reaction. And then it's just allowed to run its course, and then it's surrendered over to a higher power. And in that, is a deflating of that energy and an unraveling of that blockage. And it's done repeatedly until the energy is dissipated over enough that these thoughts don't grab attention so much. And in that diminished reactiveness to thought, there can be discovered that what appears in awareness can't be what's aware of it, and that what one has taken themselves to be heretofore it appears in awareness. So it's not really the identity, and furthermore, that it is dependently originated, that it arises from a causal chain dating back before the perception of the conceptual self. It can still be intellectually understood that there's a perception of control over these things, and thus a belief in or an identification with those things over which one has control physically and mentally. Anything that's added to that is identified with as well. So this can be demonstrated in the quote that Mark Twain gave us, saying that it's easier to convince a person of a lie than it is to convince them they've been lied to. It's because they're identified with the lie or the fact or the opinion, whatever it is, they're identified with it. And if somebody insults it in some way, it's like somebody stepped on your foot. And just as there are people who kill you for stepping on their foot, there's people who will kill you for stepping on their ideas about how the way the world should be or is. So just an allowing of space due to surrendering of the complexes of thought and energy. And it's like there's a tipping point for that, where that perception that what appears in awareness is not what's aware of it. When that really sinks in, then the perception of reality begins to change in gradations. So the spaciousness is perceived as a love when the energy is unencumbered by ideas that relate to an identity. There's a spaciousness, and in that space is the perception of love. The energy is not being modulated by distortions, resistances, lower vibration. In the absence of those things, the energy body it automatically the perceived vibration goes up along the spectrum of emotions, really. And that is something that's allowed. It's not something that's really accomplished. It's a product of letting go rather than accumulating. And as the identification with form and thought slips away, there's kind of a mixed state, a state where there's still some unconscious identification, but a fractional perception of spaciousness. And that can be a time when, as Paramahansa Ramakrishna put it, the dough is put in the hot ghee, and until the water is fully steamed out of it, it's going to make a lot of noise. So there's an inclination to share the experience of what is what one is going through. There's an inclination to share that because it's realized that the things that compelled before, that could be harmful to others in the world in various ways, or to society, those are diminished. And then there's an understanding that if that could be conveyed, it's like a fire. But it's not received equally by all. Ramana Maharshi put it thusly: it's like wood, and there are different pieces of wood can have different levels of dryness, moisture. And the drier it is when that fire is touched, the more likely and more quickly it will ignite. But if there's dampness in the wood, then it would take longer, more exposure, more letting go, more being mindful, more time with attention fully exposed to the light of the truth. There's just more to let go of, and it takes longer. But it becomes apparent that there's no real impetus to really examine the thought life for its own merits to be questioned. Not the thought content, but the propensity to be moved by looping thoughts in general. If there's an impetus to deal with unwanted thoughts, then there's a chance that by dealing with one unwanted thought, the process can be generalized. And what happens when that's done can create something seen that can't be unseen, an irreversible process. Once the energy body is perceived by the adult, then it can't be forgotten in the same way that it was forgotten as a child. The child before words has a spaciousness by default. But once the I thought is identified with, and then the other identifiers start branching out, then the attention given to that conceptual self precludes the perception of the energy body. So that tree grows into an identity, and more things are given the mantle of self, or added to the mantle of self. There are more things to offend. That's why somebody who wants you to identify with superficial things is the enemy of your soul. It's an inversion. It's an intentional inversion. It seems that with some occult knowledge, media can be used to essentially build conceptual selves within bodies. And that can be done strategically to create a desired result. It just takes a little bit more long-term thinking. And one realizes that the positions can't be overcome, but positionality can be destroyed. Because while there's identification with positions, there's not identification with positionality. But there really has to be an impetus. It's not the thing that the happy tend to pursue for no reason other than curiosity. And even if perhaps the wood is wet in the happiness, there's no reason, no strong reason to want to part from unwanted thoughts. It's like a breakable object on a shelf. The more suffering there is, the higher up it is, the higher a shelf it's on, and thus the greater the potential energy when it is surrendered. So when there's a great deal of suffering, perhaps from trauma or a unfulfilled desire that's just so strong, but it's not going to be fulfilled, and ultimately it has to be surrendered. The more energy there is behind that, the greater there is to have a breaking of the conceptual self that allows for the perception of the energy. If the thing for which is pining is just insignificant, to really let go of the reality of having it doesn't cause a shift within. It has to be the departure of something that was taking up enough space to leave a space in which to perceive the truth. That's why blessed are the poor in spirit. Thanks for listening.